The Russians have begun the anticipated offensive into Kharkiv Oblast and opened a new front. This will obviously take the mainstay of today's situation report, but we'll also talk about the developments along other parts of the front line, as well as about, for instance, new satellite pictures indicating how much heavy equipment the Russians might still be able to reactivate. We'll talk about international aid, about political developments, and much, much more. Before we start, a quick thank you to the unknown donator of the book, The Return of Great Powers. It was donated with the Amazon wishlist that is in the description. Thank you very much to the unknown donor. Thank you very much. We'll start off initially with the Ukrainian strikes against Russian oil infrastructure. Ukraine has struck an oil depot in Luhansk with ATACMS. They've struck an oil depot in Krasnodar Krai with drones, so down here. And they've hit an oil refinery in Salvat in Bashkortostan. And that is the big news. We see it here, and for instance we can see the drones being visible on the horizon. I'm not sure, it's not in a high resolution, it doesn't really matter too much, but what matters is where it was. Now we are talking about a distance of 1,500 kilometers from the border of Ukraine, which at that area is even occupied by Russia, so likely a strike distance of 1,800 kilometers, or significantly over 1,000 miles. This basically means everything west of the Urals and more or less everything in the Urals is in range for Ukraine's drones if they have enough of it. They also hit another oil depot. According to the Russian administrations, this was a hit where they hit the pumping station in the refinery, but they also hit an oil refinery in Kaluga, which is southwest of Moscow, so significantly closer. But we see two refineries being hit, two oil depots being hit. Ukraine continues with its strategic air campaign against Russian oil infrastructure. But at the same time, the Russian offensive in the north of Ukraine has started. On the 8th of May, there were still reports that a sabotage group of 10 men tried to cross in Pylina, which is here. So they tried to cross here. At that point, on the 8th of May, the Ukrainians were saying that they still managed to defeat them. So that seemed to have been some kind of reconnaissance in force, like the last attacks, like the last sabotage and reconnaissance groups, because now they have crossed the border in force. The Russians have crossed it at several parts, mostly infantry attacks between the towns of Strilecha, here down to Zelene. Here it was mostly infantry, whereas Russian mechanized attacks were aiming at Vovchansk here in the north of it. As of now, we have confirmation by the Ukrainian side that Strilecha, Krasne, Pylina and Borisivka have been captured by the Russians. Those are the towns here, those four towns here. We also know that the Russians at the very least have entered the two towns here in Pletenivka and Hatishche, I think. I'm sorry for the butchering of those names. So they have entered those towns. Whether they are under Russian control as of now, I'm not completely certain. Generally, the Ukrainians have shown to have done serious damage to the Russian attackers, but let's not kid ourselves. The Russians were still managed to push them back successfully. But this is, again, something that shouldn't surprise us too much, as the attacker obviously has the element of surprise, and thus it is expected that they should advance initially. The big question will be how far will they advance? We'll talk about the overall situation later, but we already know the Ukrainians are saying they just think the Russians want to advance 10 kilometers south, that this is all that they are probably aiming at for now. Further east along the front line, we have a small change in territory here at Sinkivka. The Russians are now have this tree line fully under their control, which means they, after months of fighting, have managed to gain this tree line here, but the town of Sinkivka is still under Ukrainian control. Further south, close to Novoselivke, we also have another Russian success. Here in the area, the Russians managed to advance somewhat west towards the Sherebets, gaining some additional ground. But that was it north of the Seversky Donetsk. South of it, we do have change further in the area of Chasiv Yar initially first, or let's start off with the area of Siversk. Here again, the Russians keep up the pressure. Ukraine is saying that they managed to hold them back, and we do not have evidence of recent change in territory, but the Ukrainian soldiers in that area say that the Russian superiority is massive, which would indicate that we should expect some pushbacks of the Ukrainian positions in the near future, at least if we listen to the Ukrainian soldiers that say that they are holding on by a thread and that the Russian forces are massively superior. The Russians are also continuing to attack at Chasiv Yar, and there was not a big change in territory, but there was a change in territory. First of all, we have visual evidence of the Russians being here inside of the dachas. This is on the map here. This was the road, so this is roughly here. In total, we are talking about 200 meters, a couple of houses further west, but it's still an advance into Chasiv Yar. That doesn't change about it. And at Ivanivske, the advance is roughly the same, maybe a little further, depending on where you count it. But we do have them entering the tree line here, at the tree line right at the canal, which is here. So from their latest solidified positions here in the trees, they have now reached this point here. They have reached the banks of the Siversky, of the Donetsk Canal, but we do not see them having crossed it as of now. The commander, Oleg Shiryaev, who is the commander of the 225th Assault Brigade, is saying in an interview that the Russians at Chasiv Yar are 10 times superior in numbers and materiel, again showing us the severity of the Ukrainian position, but at least as of now their fortifications more or less are holding out. That was all in the area of Bakhmut. We switch over south to the area of Avdiivka. Here we have additional advances by the Russian. It seems like for now the Russians have been stopped in the area around Ocheretine and Arkhangelsk. Now we have seen the Russians coming close to Novoalexandrivka, and we know that they were pushing in the direction of Kalinove, but I cannot see that they have managed to advance in this direction. Where they did advance is Umanske. Here we have visual evidence of the Russians being inside of Umanske by now. Geolocalization showing us like this is all of Umanske, and north of that lake here they have roughly entered half of the town is with their presence. Now, I cannot confirm as of now, so they were roughly until here. Let me quickly recheck it. So we have the actual distance. Now, this is where the water makes it, yeah, roughly here. I do not have proof that they are still there at this moment, but we know that they managed to advance deep into the town itself, so the town itself is now massively under threat and definitely no longer fully under control of the Ukrainian forces. Between Umanske and Netailove, they also advanced. In this area here, that was to be expected as well, especially with them already in Netailove. And in Netailove, we have additional small advances as well by the Russians. Those are here, here, and further south. So more or less here and here. And if we look at it on the map, that should be here and somewhere in here. So few hundred meters, 200-300 meters at most, but still an advance from their side. And we see them closing the bulge here inside of their front. That's not unexpected. I talked about it in the last situation reports with the Russians at Nevelske, with them in Pervomaiske, and having reached that lake here. That obviously puts the Ukrainian positions here at risk. We know the Ukrainians are withdrawing, and that was obviously obvious on the map that they should be withdrawing. Whether this is all under Russian control now or not, I cannot confirm. We have visual evidence of the Russians being here now. Whether they have already taken this is unclear, but it's extremely likely, at least with a look on the map. Further south at Marinka, we have the Russians claiming that they took control of the whole brick factory. We do know that they have been in here and are likely controlling the eastern part. We had visual evidence that I showed you 2 or 3 situation reports ago that they have been here, but we do not know whether they took full control. In the past, we've seen tanks operating up to this point here and basically up till here, meaning that it's likely that the position might be under Russian control already, but there's no visual evidence yet. So far, it's only the Russian claims. We do have visual evidence, though, of them having some success in the southern area south of the railroads. This is roughly here. This area is likely under Russian control, more or less. We have them advancing here. I've also seen visual evidence of them here in the tree line, which makes it fairly likely that this position is no longer with serious Ukrainian presence. But again, no visual evidence of this yet. Further south, no changes that I can report. Nothing at Marinka, nothing at Novomikhailivka as of now, but we do have some changes in Velika Novosilka, or at least some events here. There was a video of a Russian, you see it here in the background, and again, YouTube doesn't like that too much, so I'm not making it, I'm not showing you the video in detail. This is a Russian BTR that is racing through a town, and it was geolocalized in Uroshaine, that the truck, that the BTR started here, the video, and was driving down until here. I should probably switch it over like this. So it came from more or less, center is too much, but from the southern third of Uroshaine. Let me quickly recheck. Now this is where the road comes from the side, so it came from here, which means it was further north, or it unloaded troops somewhere. How it came there, what it did there, how much of this is still under Ukrainian control is unclear. We do know that the Ukrainians shoot at it with shoulder-fired anti-tank weapons while it's driving south, but as it is driving really fast, the Ukrainian anti-tank weapons miss. 3 of them actually miss it, so it advances further south. This does not mean that this is no longer under Ukrainian control. We have seen the BTR being fired at from, I think it should be this position here, but it's still showing that the Ukrainian presence in the town must be pretty low. Otherwise, it would not be possible to drive around here with one BTR like this. Unless, of course, we expect that it was a lot before and this was the only one surviving, but we do not have other visual evidence. So apart from that we know that they advance further north into Uroshaine as of now, while the control is not confirmed. The only other change I have here is south of Orikhiv, Robotine. Now, I do not have fresh changes, but I think while the Deep State map insists on not changing the map recently, here is Petrenko's map. He's a Ukrainian military blogger that is, to what I see, very accurate and very honest, and this is the map that he's presenting. So Gray Zone basically is claiming that this doesn't have consistent Russian presence, that this is still a contested area, but he extends it to the furthest north, where I've shown you visual evidence of them being. This is the map he presents. According to him, this should be still under Ukrainian control, as well as this fortification line here probably, but that's at least how a pro-Ukrainian military blogger shows the situation here. So not as good as the Deep State map, but not as bad as others might paint it. Regardless, while Robotine surely has a Russian presence in it as of now, we do so far not hear that the Russians managed to come back to the Nestria island. The Russians are continuously trying to do that after Ukraine has announced it has liberated it, and the recent reports were they were trying it with jet skis, apparently trying to do it with speed, but according to the Ukrainian side, they failed. After we did all the updates from the front line, let's talk about the offensive from the north. Now, the Kharkiv offensive is unlikely to take Kharkiv. That seems extremely unlikely. The estimates to what is needed are far, far higher than the estimates of what the Russians have there right now. The highest amount I've read from Ukrainian analysts was 50,000 men, but that included positions up to Bryansk. That wasn't just Belgorod. Belgorod itself at most are 35,000 men. This is enough to push the Ukrainians back, but not to take a city with 1 million population that is a vast, I think Ukraine's second biggest city, no chance in hell to take them with these small amounts. So the offensive itself, when it can't take even Kharkiv, what does it have? What goals does it have? And there are two obvious goals in this context. The first is to fix reserves, and this is already successful. We have reports from yesterday that the Ukrainian army is rushing in reserves to stop the Russians. So anything that is being brought in here can now obviously no longer help at any other part of the front line. It can no longer be used for any offensives, theoretical offensives, at least from the Ukrainian side. So in this, it already has some military benefit for the Russian side. The other thing is likely that they're going to try to push the Ukrainians away from Belgorod, that has recently been occasionally shelled by the Ukrainians with multiple launch rocket systems, while they are pushing the Ukrainians away from that, so they can't use extended range BM-21 anymore. At the same time, they gain range with smaller systems on the city of Kharkiv. Here again, obviously tube artillery would be the most fearsome, as it's the cheapest and the easiest to use against them. They already have it in glide bomb range and in ballistic missile range. We see them being used against the city again and again, but the probable goal with this offensive is not just to fix troops, but to push the Ukrainians away from the front lines so they can't shell Belgorod anymore, but Russia can start shelling Kharkiv with its tube artillery. Ukraine is also reporting that the intensity and the frequency of Russian attacks is growing along the whole front line. Now, this is in context both for the standard Russian doctrine, where they obviously know about the concept of creating a Schwerpunkt, a focus of their attacks, but the general modus operandi is to attack along the whole front line to fix the enemy in place so he can't shift around reserves anymore to then do the main thrust in one direction. In this context, it kind of makes sense, but also it has another theory while this is done, that probably the aim is to use to gain as much of an advantage before the Western aid is arriving in bigger numbers, as the US Congress has finally agreed to a big aid package for Ukraine, which now is getting slowly, part by part, is materializing for help for Ukraine. This still will take some time until it's along the front line, but this allows the Russians a small window of opportunity until these additional aid will show its direct effect. And another reason for the current intensity is probably also that the Rasputitsa is supposedly over, so the mud season is gone and the Ukrainians and the Russians can now more freely operate along the ground. Lieutenant General Pavlyuk, who is the commander of the Ukrainian ground forces, is saying in the next 2 months, Russia will try a breakthrough before the aid is going to play a big role. This is basically a confirmation from the Ukrainian side, and he according to him, the next 2 months are the most difficult ones to be expected. Also, we have some other news. The United States Department of Defense and Starlink are working together to prevent Russia from using Starlink. We had the reports in the past months that the Russians were starting to use Starlink with systems that were smuggled in from other country. But as all those systems have an ID, they can be traced whether they were delivered to Ukraine legitimately or not, and that is probably happening right now. We have some more bad news for Ukraine, though. There's a fresh video showing a strike on 2 Mi-24 combat helicopters and an Mi-8 that are refueling behind the front line, and again they have been spotted by the Russian ISR, and again they have been struck with long-range rocket systems. This is the second time we see strikes on Ukrainian helicopters refueling along the front line, and while we can talk a lot about changes in the front lines and changes among the quality of troops on both sides, this is one thing that needs to be acknowledged. Russia has massively improved its kill chain, if we want to call it this way. The speed that it takes for Russia to identify a target and then strike it has increased massively. At the beginning of the war, the reports were that it took up to 2 days for Russian soldiers to get permission to strike an identified target, meaning that the target might no longer have been there, that it might have already done a lot of damage. Now the time frame between the decisions is obviously significantly reduced, and that is a clear improvement of the Russian quality that we can observe here. And we have a map showing us supposedly the fortifications between Ocheretine. Now, Spatial Grounds is the map maker for military land, and so far he seemed to be fairly accurate. I have no proof and confirmation of the exact positions of the defenses here, but as you can see, this is the assumed Russian advance here, and we see quite a lot of defenses, even continuous lines, and we see the high ground here being used by one position after the other with positions in the rear of it. So the Russian advance should not be as easy as it might have looked, and at the same time, obviously, every day that the Ukrainian soldiers along the frontier stop the Russians gives those more time to improve their fortifications. In troop generation, we have some news from Russia. Here we have a Newsweek article referencing to Twitter, and according to satellite pictures, Russia has 10,389 AFV still on stock. 10,389 in their stockpiles. This is 4,763 less than 2021, so minus 32%. Among those are various types. We talk about IFVs, APCs, etc. And for instance, among the MTLB, from 2,527, only 922 are left. There are only 244 BMD left. Those are the IFVs for the air assault groups. 244 out of 637, so only 38% left. And from BTR 50, that's these ancient and completely obsolete APCs, 52 are left out of 152, and among BTR 60, 70, and 80, there are 2,605 still left, if I understand it correctly. This is minus 708. Theoretically, if we take the numbers, especially the initial one, that 10,389 are left, and there's minus 4,763, so 32% have been used after roughly 2 years of war, should indicate that they would last another 4 years. This is giving us a ballpark, but obviously it's not that easy. First of all, this number only works if we generalize all kind of types. A MTLB has a completely different spectrum of capabilities than a BMP2, then a BMD, then a BTR 80, anything like this. If we just generalize it and assume that the Russians would be able to replace a BMP2 with or a BMP3 with an MTLB without loss of capability, only then would we assume that it lasts for 4 years. And obviously among the rest that is there will be some that have been cannibalized to make others run. So at the very least, the time it takes to make them running again will be significantly lower. Others are in bad shape. Generally, we should assume that the ones being taken out of storage are the ones in best shape, as you want them in the front as fast as possible. So everything that's left with every item that is being taken out of storage, the next item should be in a little worse shape and need a little more time to make it worth using again. So overall, 4 years is the theoretical range, but obviously only if we assume that it takes the same time to reactivate, that everything can be as well reactivated as before, and that the capabilities are the same, which is in every case obviously not the case. Then, according to HIMARS, which is an open source analyst, he looked at the artillery, and on the most important storage base, for instance, the artillery number has gone down by 60%, and the vast majority of what is left are World War II artillery pieces. Now, World War II artillery pieces can still kill. We see the Maxim machine gun on use at the very least on the Ukrainian side, but I think I've seen it being used by the Russians as well. They can still kill. But a Second World War artillery has shorter range, and it might cause problems. It might have problems with new shells, even in the same caliber, because they have bigger loads, bigger propellants, and of course the time might have taken toll on the artillery piece. So a significant part of those will not be able to be reactivated as well. And we have news from Russia that the Russians are copying the Baba Yaga drone. These are heavy drones the Ukrainians have developed to transport. Basically, it's a bomber. a bomber that drops heavy explosives in comparison to other drones on Russian positions. And as we have seen a couple of times in this war already, if the opposite side uses something that you are fearing, then you copy it. The Ukrainians start to use a Lancet that they copy, and now we see the Russians copying the Baba Yaga. And the observation here is that supposedly it might have the receiver for GPS under the level of the overall drone, and might maybe even shield it to the side and towards the ground to make jamming less difficult. At least that's the explanation here. Whether that works or not is unfortunately not my expertise. In the political sphere, we have some more things from Russia. The spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Sakharova, was claimed in an interview that Moldova is doing eugenics like in the Third Reich, and that the Moldovan language is being replaced with Romanian, which shows parts of genocide. Now, to put this in perspective, first of all, as far as I know, Moldovan language is basically Romanian, just with a few Russian words in it. And I think it was written in Cyrillic instead of in Latin words. So that's the main difference. There should not be any difficulty for both sides to understand each other. At least that's my understanding. And of course, to talk about a genocide in this context, we've seen that this was one of the excuses Russia brought to invade Ukraine. And then a look on the map would indicate that it would make a lot of sense for the Russians to not leave Moldova as a whole once they've advanced to this point. So this might be the preparation of a future ambition towards Moldova. At the same time, pro-Russian politicians from Gagauzia, which is a pro-Russian, I think, Turkish language region in Moldova, politicians from there have been invited to the victory parade in Moscow, showing again Russian ambitions to divide Moldovan interior politics, in domestic politics. And in international aid, we have a new $400 million package from the US that includes Patriot, NASAMS, missiles, Stinger, that is Manpads, then some equipment probably to create Frankensam, so Kup and Bux launchers to retrofit them to use the AIM-7, the Sparrow, probably the Sea Sparrow version. Then HIMARS ammunition, additional 105 and 155 millimeter shells, Bradley IFVs, M113s, MRAPs, TOW anti-tank weapons, Javelin 84 anti-tank weapons, HARM high-speed anti-radiation missiles against air defense systems, and more. So a big new aid packages is already being announced towards Ukraine. Then Germany, and that's the final news today, Germany bought 3 HIMARS launchers from the US to hand them over towards Ukraine. The obvious question is why, if that's possible, why did they do this now and not over the last 6 months when Ukraine needed aid? But that's a question that the German government needs to answer. I can't. That was it from me for now. If you enjoyed this situation report, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment. What do you think about the current developments and what do you think the Russian offensive towards Kharkiv might achieve? And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everyone already supporting this channel. And that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching and I'll be back.